Good evening, friends. Well, it's Friday once again, and I'm back with another tale from my collection. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call RoadKill. While she waited to pay for the gas and 2 cups of coffee, Andrea perused the display of trinkets on sale for passing tourists. Small keychains with cute sayings, and baseball caps with the gas station logo or Raton, New Mexico blazed across them in striking fluorescent colors. Why anyone would want to remember passing through this hick town, she couldn't guess. Her eyes caught on a display which loudly touted the effectiveness of the personal protection it held. Small tubular vials of pepper spray and imitation mace claimed to protect one from intruders. Fine if you got a chance to use it, she thought. The woman in front of her finally finished counting pennies for her purchase, and Andrea felt herself pushed to the counter by the line behind her. The cashier seemed to have landed on Earth only this morning by the way she stared blankly at the coffee. It seemed as though she not only did not know what to charge for it, but had no idea what the thin black liquid in the cups was. Having released the tension of her swollen bladder, Joyce headed back to the car with a renewed spring in her step and a desire to push on. Andrea handed her a steaming mug of coffee as she joined her at the front of the station, and they walked through the scattered pack of cars huddled under the canopy. Eastbound traffic was non-existent as they headed down the road out of town, and Joyce was glad, as she had no desire to wear the coffee resting in her lap. Andrea slipped the plastic from a cassette she had purchased at the gas station and pushed it into the stereo. A deep, scratchy voice began to regale them with a song about being a truck driver, and Joyce laughed. "What in the world ever made you pick up that tape?" she asked with a smile. "Oh, I don't know. I thought about our trip, and when I saw the tape, it reminded me of my father." Andrea looked out the window. "You know, he used to drive a truck when I was little, and I can remember waiting for his call every night." A short span of silence enveloped the interior of the car as the first song ended. Joyce looked over at her friend and saw she was concentrating on the memory. When the next song sprang to life, Andrea resumed. "He used to call every night just before dinner like clockwork. I can remember there were several times when he didn't call that Mama and I didn't eat supper until late in the night because we would be waiting for him to call. Usually it was because he'd been crossing some desolate stretch of highway and couldn't get to a phone, but there were a few times when his truck had broken down." Andrea took a sip of her coffee and stared out the window. "I remember the last time he didn't call. Mama and I couldn't eat because he hadn't called, and we sat together on the couch in our little trailer with the phone on the coffee table in front of us, just waiting. Mama had an 8-track tape on the stereo of trucking songs, and we just waited, listening." Andrea drank again from her coffee. Joyce could see the story bothered her friend, but she had never heard it before, so she waited. They'd been friends for a long time, and Andrea's father was already gone when they met. For some reason, she had never thought to ask about him over the years, and now she listened intently. The silence continued for a long time, and Joyce wondered if Andrea had dragged her backward through the mists of time only to leave her waiting there, wondering why they had come. With the beginning of another song, she finally continued. "As I sat there on the couch with my head leaning against my mama and listening to the music, I was aware that I was very hungry, and for the first time, I wanted to eat before he called. It was like some part of me knew he wasn't going to call." She sniffed and wiped at her face. "For a long time after that, I felt so ashamed. When Mama had fallen asleep, I went into the kitchen and got my plate from the oven where she had kept it to warm, and I sat at the table to eat. I remember looking at the clock and seeing it was after midnight, but I didn't care. I was hungry. I had just finished my supper and was pouring myself a glass of milk when the phone rang. It startled me, and I dropped the half-full glass. As Mama reached for the phone, she looked at me and the broken glass on the floor at my feet, and she smiled. It was as if nothing mattered, because Daddy was calling and everything was going to be all right." Andrea took a deep breath. "I remember standing there in a puddle of milk, holding the paper milk carton while Mama talked on the phone. I knew it wasn't Daddy because of the way she talked, and I also knew something was wrong." Mama hung up the phone and there were tears in her eyes. She called me over and hugged me tightly and said, "Daddy isn't going to call, baby." "Why, Mama? Why isn't Daddy going to call?" Andrea said aloud in the silence between songs as she looked tearfully at Joyce. Mama said that Daddy had been in an accident and he didn't make it. I ran to my room and I grabbed the picture of Daddy from my bureau. I stood there looking at his picture with tears streaming down my cheeks, and I felt I'd betrayed him. If only I had waited to eat until he called, everything would have been just the same. Andrea searched her purse for a tissue and blew her nose. "I was only 8 years old, Joyce. 8 years old, and I was firmly convinced that I had killed my daddy." Joyce felt a lump rise in her throat with the welling of emotion that consumed her. She wanted to say something to make it all better, but there were no words. Only silence. Slowly she reached across and squeezed Andrea's hand. The silence remained as they continued into the night, but she knew her friend's pain, and was doing what she could to comfort her. Joyce set the cruise control once they had passed the rolling hills outside Raton. She knew from experience that the state police loved to ticket speeders on desolate two-lane highways and often set speed traps. As a precaution, she set the speed a couple miles an hour below the posted limit. A long silence had dominated the interior of the car since Andrea had related the story about her father. It was an easy, comfortable silence, though, between two people who enjoyed each other's company and didn't feel the need to talk just to fill the void. Their calculations estimated they should arrive in Amarillo, where they planned to stop, sometime before midnight. In the morning, they would take time to have a leisurely breakfast and explore the town a little before continuing on. Since there was no set time schedule or reason for getting to their destination quickly, she anticipated it might be fun to look around and explore each good-sized town as they passed. Kinda like a permanent vacation. Looking over at Andrea, Joyce hoped she would eventually find a man she could love and trust as much as she did her friend. Someone with goals and desires compatible to her own, who wouldn't hurt her or place her needs below his own. Someday, I might even want to have children, she thought. She'd always wanted to have kids, but while she was with Ricky, it was impossible. The lifestyle they had shared on his meager salary was far from what she desired, and to add kids to it would have given her no life whatsoever. No, it was better to wait until she could afford to live the way she wanted and give her kids the life they deserved. A long line of trucks rolled by, headed west as they passed through yet another obscure town in the wilderness, bringing back to mind the story Andrea had told her. How had they been friends for so long without her knowing how her dad died? It was obvious that the memory was painful, and Joyce decided that her friend must have decided to disclose the story as a way of cleansing her soul and breaking ties with home. Whatever the reason, Joyce was glad to have been there when she was needed. In the rearview mirror, Joyce saw a car coming up fast and wondered what kind of idiot would so blatantly ignore the speed limit on a road like this. Not only was it dangerous, but it could be costly. The car slowed as it approached, making her wonder why, as there was no oncoming traffic to impede its passing her. She looked into the mirror steadily out of curiosity and had her question answered when the driver lit a cigarette. On the dash was a light bar, and she could see the telltale wire mesh behind his head, pegging it as a police car. She looked down at the speedometer to confirm her compliance. Even though she was doing nothing wrong and had proof of insurance, the police car made her nervous. It had always been that way, and she wondered why. The police are supposed to be our friends, and yet their very presence has a tendency to make us nervous. Perhaps it lies in the fact that none of us likes to be scrutinized, she thought to herself. For several long minutes the car hung behind her before backing off slightly, and Joyce relaxed a little as it fell behind. She expected that any minute now he would pull to the side of the road to turn around, and was surprised when he turned on his lights to pull her over. What for, she had no idea, but resolved to relax and get through this as quickly as possible. Joyce eased the car over to the shoulder and waited for the cop to come to her window. He sat in the squad car doing something, and she had to force herself to be patient. "What do you suppose he wants?" Joyce asked Andrea. I know for a fact I wasn't speeding, and my registration is good." "Who knows? Maybe he's just lonely and wants someone to talk to," Andrea giggled as she turned to look at the car. "Don't turn around." "Why? We haven't done nothing wrong. I just want to see if he's cute." Andrea continued to watch the cop. When the officer opened the door to get out, Andrea noticed the Denver badge on his door and looked at the license plate. It was a Colorado plate. "Hey, Joyce, why do you suppose a Colorado cop is pulling us over in New Mexico?" Andrea was concerned now. "What do you mean?" Joyce looked in the mirror, but his headlights prevented her seeing his license plate. "I mean, he's got a Denver sticker on his door and Colorado tags." Andrea turned and sat back down. "Joyce, drive." "What?" Joyce was confused. "Just drive. Not only is he a Colorado cop, but he's got his gun in his hand. Now drive." Joyce looked into the rearview mirror. The cop was slowly walking toward them, and he did have a gun in his hand. Looking at Andrea, she could see the terror in her eyes and shifted the car into gear even as she stepped on the gas. In a rearview mirror, Joyce could see the cop running back to his car. "What do we do now? If he was working for this state and it was a legitimate stop, then we're guilty of running from the law." "Well, we're only about 25 miles from Clayton. There's a bear den there, and we know it's official." Andrea looked out the rear window. "We'll just head there and report what happened to them. I don't think they're going to arrest us for being two scared women in the middle of nowhere." "What's a bear den?" Joyce had lost the rest of what Andrea said, trying to figure this out. "It's trucker talk for state patrol barracks." Andrea was still looking at her pursuers. The squad car quickly caught up to them, with its lights still flashing, and Joyce wondered what she should do. If they went to the state police, everything should be okay. But what if they did charge her with fleeing? She had no desire to go to jail. Looking in the rearview mirror, Joyce saw the lights go off in the squad car, and it fell back. Why would a legitimate cop give up so easily? For all he knew, she was carrying drugs or something. Maybe he realized that he was after two scared women and didn't want to scare them further, causing an accident. Or maybe his dispatcher had radioed back that there had been an error when he checked them out, and they weren't who he was after. No matter, she was relieved to see him go. Driving cautiously since he had turned his lights off again, he relied on the dim moonlight to show him the way. He could not see the road's surface, only the dim glow of the reflective paint used to mark the shoulder and center of the road. Jim watched the road ahead for any sign of the two women. It was possible that they knew he would not give up and would try to elude him in some way. As he crested a hill, a smile spread on his face. There below, he could see them parked on the side of the road. It was all downhill now, so he turned off the engine and let the car coast. Without the engine to push it, the police car slowed to a comfortable pace, which made it easy to control without power steering. Letting the driving fade to practiced actions, Jim concentrated on the car below. There seemed to be someone standing beside them, but there were no other vehicles in sight. They wouldn't stop to pick up a hitchhiker, would they? His mind reeled with the possibilities. Slowly he crept forward until he was within a couple 100 feet of the prey. Now the dim glow of their taillights reflected off something, and he could see the New Mexico State Patrol car parked to the side of her. That must mean they had stopped to ask for help. Well, there would be no help this night. Had anyone helped his family when that car was bearing down on them? He rolled to a stop about 50 feet behind them and silently eased from the car. Careful to keep the door from clicking shut to maintain his silent advantage, Jim stood beside the car with his pistol in one hand and the other resting on the vehicle's light switch. He raised the gun to the other officer and flipped on the lights. "Get away from those women! This is my bust!" The state trooper turned toward the sound, but Jim knew he couldn't see him through the lights. The other man reached for his weapon, leaving Jim no choice. As the trooper cleared leather, he fired 2 shots, striking the man in the face and the throat. He watched the cop fall to the ground in a crumpled heap. There was no pity in him now. That cop had obviously been crooked, or else why would he be trying to help criminals? The suspect vehicle pulled away from the curb in a screech of rubber, and Jim got into his car to resume the chase. He had to swerve to avoid the trooper's body, but it only registered as a road hazard. Danforth's mind had pushed the fact that he had killed a cop far away and left it there. In his mind, The man was nothing more than a criminal masquerading as an officer, just like the Aurora liaison. The lights of Clayton were drawing nearer now, and Jim knew he must get them before they reached the safety of a populated area. Just ahead, he could see an overpass bridge and knew if he didn't get them before the bridge, it would be over for now. The speedometer climbed past 100, then 110. Finally, it peaked at 120. Still, the car accelerated. The overpass bridge ahead began a sharp turn to the right almost as soon as the highway emptied onto it, making it necessary for drivers to slow and approach cautiously. In addition, it was fairly steep and had no cant to the side with which to shed excessive speed into centrifugal force. A vehicle coming onto the bridge too fast risked serious harm. Suddenly, he was on them. With the bridge now only a football field away, he mashed the accelerator to ram them and relished the impact. The other car had been moving slower, and this slowed his vehicle, but he was in control. Like a tugboat moving a ship, he was pushing the car ahead of him where he wanted it to go. As they came onto the bridge, Jim hit the brakes to free himself of the other car and slow to a speed safe enough to cross the bridge. Unable to effectively slow down, the other car veered wildly to the right before the driver overcorrected and braked hard, sending it screaming in a cloud of burning rubber through the guardrail into the blackness beyond. The wrenching of metal split the night as they slammed into the railroad tracks below. Jim continued on over the bridge and turned around at the first opportunity. Looking into the blackness below, he was sure no one could have survived and headed back to Colorado, where he would spend the night in the motel before going home. He had avenged his family. His mind was filled with joy as he passed the dead trooper and never even noticed the body laying there. I hope you enjoyed that. As you see here on the outro, I have two of my book covers. Dark Fragments, a book of short stories that includes Roadkill and Running Wild, which are excerpts from the novel Pursuing Phantoms. In 1995, while making the 16-hour drive from Colorado Springs to Houston on a very long stretch of road across New Mexico, I looked up in time to realize I was being passed by a police car. When it went by, I saw it was from Colorado and wondered why a Colorado cop was racing across New Mexico. This was the inspiration for the novel Pursuing Phantoms, which was originally titled Roadkill. Both of these books, as well as my other 5 currently published, are available on Amazon.com. If you stuck with me to here, thanks so much for taking the time to listen. Y'all make my efforts feel worthwhile. I'll be back again next Friday with another tale, so until then, sleep well.